there was, historically, there was a very important point in the African American spirit. It's called Reconstruction. And I'm quite sure that at the advent of Reconstruction, someone must have thought that we were entering a post-racial society. Because during this period of time, African Americans were elected to office. African Americans, you had black sheriffs in the South where you never had them before. You had black legislators in Texas, Ruby and Gaines in Texas, and in other places. So you had a window of opportunity, very short, 10 years roughly, a window of opportunity in which people could have come to the understanding that maybe they were in some sort of a post-racial society. But I never forget the night I saw Obama being the inauguration and all of that stuff. And by the way, my wife got to go to that. I had to stay at home and watch this, but what I said to people at church that Sunday or whenever it was, right after that, I said, don't go to sleep. While everybody was dancing in the street, my quote was, don't go to sleep. Because if you do, they will turn the table. Because that base of racialized thought has gone nowhere. It's gone nowhere.
And I just, oh, sorry, one last thing. Just to bring together these comments, the opening thing I said about redemption, there's all kinds of ways that one can perceive redemption, right? And one way, there's all kinds of wonderful ways. And there's also the way that says, kind of back to what Dr. Jones was talking about, is to sort of say, we've pressed the reset button, right? We're starting from zero. And so why are you lingering on all that old stuff, right? And the period of time that followed Reconstruction, when conservative white politicians in the South regained control and created segregation, that they call that redemption, right? So I think that what we're talking about is sort of the messiness of wanting to, all the reasons why people want to forget and heal a certain thing, but continue certain ideals at the same time.
Sorry, would that be the Tea Party?
I wanted to add to something brought up about, I was thinking about in Peru, in 1940, the government stopped using labels by jobs and identifying people of different races. And you could think of that period today as the government is supporting this, stopping these labels, mestizo, mulatto, Andean, white, Spanish. So they removed all that in 1940, but it still hasn't changed it. You still have racism. You still have that more so. I would say than classism. Where here I would say it's kind of like it goes back and forth. But then there's also those things don't change because there's still trauma. It doesn't matter your race, especially in this country, because this is fundamentally a capitalist country. And so you can't separate class, race, and capitalism. In the South,
and inequality.
correct. The South, the idea of thinking, I'm sorry if I'm jumping around, but I'm just also thinking more part of the audience. But also the fact that, addressing trauma, addressing the South, and Southern groups, people sometimes go through trauma by trying to relive also that which they lost, the Civil War. And so you often always see recreations of Civil War battles that the South, that they won. And it's very interesting that this goes on and on and on. It's always reliving that small moment when they won certain battles. And it has to always kind of relive that because nobody's actually dealt with the trauma of that period. Nobody's dealt with the trauma of black slavery in America, the trauma of the Middle Passage, the trauma that the last I guess, I'm thinking about Peru at the same time, and that hasn't been dealt with. So how can we just say, let's start anew? It's like telling a Vietnam or any soldier from any war, here or abroad, when they come back, to deal with the traumas by just forgetting about it. So if we talk about Vietnam, how many films, books have been written about that, just from that trauma from those who came back? And a lot of people still committed suicide from that period. And I don't mean ending their lives. I mean, committing suicide takes sometimes a lifetime. And it's also, you infect others. So there's a sickness here that we're talking about that's not addressed. And it's in our subconscious, in our consciousness. So I'm just responding to a lot of the comments that everybody made. I'm sorry for jumping.
So maybe I should have asked, like, post-racial, yay or nay, but I think I sort of get it. What about the audience? Can we get a quick show of hands, post-racial, yay or nay? So we'll start with yay. Post-racial, yay? No? Nobody's going to say it? Okay, the post-racial, nay? I know I should have started it. That means I have to play the post-racial, yay character.
But we have to be careful with labels, because every decade has a new label.
As a new label, right. So
for everything.
So I guess maybe that's what this whole thing to me is really the interesting exercises and the idea of labeling. And you can go ahead.
I was going to say, my sister recently, she moved to North Carolina. The church she belonged to has, I think it's called an Amen Society, which is primarily African American. My sister is one. And she has felt very embraced by this group and by their studying and by their exploration of this, not of racialism or poster or whatever, but of the wound. And a book that they have recently read that she shared with me is called Warmed by Their Sons. I don't know if y'all know that book. It's written by Isabel Wilkerson, I think I want to say her last name. She's a Pulitzer Prize winner, Los Angeles Times, African American, who wrote this book about the migration, the great migration of blacks out of the South over really a 70-year period, and maybe still today. I find that there are a lot more books now that I'm finding that more openly discuss the loss, the hurt, the wound, I think I think one of the thoughts, one of the thoughts that I've held is that, to me, I've always been extraordinarily impressed, deeply, heartfully impressed by how black people are willing to forget. And you've seen this demonstrated on the news, I mean, very much public arena kind of thing, over and over again. On a very simple level, when Bill Clinton went to the black community and apologized for wrongs. And so I think there's something to this redemptive, that was a different time, there still is something to that redemptive quality that I frankly find that if I was going to give kind of a characteristic to the black race, which is huge and it doesn't exist, except in our social laws, it would be that of redemption.
And Cornel West actually calls that the lesson that America needs to learn, what a blues nation can learn from a blues people. That's basically what he says is the lesson that America should learn from the blues people. Okay, so I have to be the post-racial yay character. So, to me it is an exercise in labeling, and we can sit here and say, like, we shouldn't partake in labeling because of how it's been applied and things. But the point is, like, we as human beings, we label. That's how we come to, communicate. James Baldwin has a quote, "Every legend, moreover, contains its residue of truth, and the root function of language is to control the universe by describing it." So how would you answer my friend from Senegal, who says that race is such a modern concept, and we're now in post-modernity, which is, we have modernity, which had this sort of like universal truth, biological idea of race and histories and just identity in general, and then the breakdown of it, which was to acknowledge that, in fact, we live in a pluralistic society. There are many ideas of truth, and then also the idea of race is also broken down in that discussion. So if race is something modern, you know, that the word race, you know, then how do we like start to, or do we need to, I guess I should say?
You know, she's next. I just jumped over the top of it. But what I do with my students in class, this is what I do. And I'll do it right now. How many of you all have heard someone, I don't know, in the last, we'll say 5 to 10 years, how many of you all have heard someone say something very racist? A relative, a close friend, anybody? Have you heard some, raise your hand if you've heard somebody say a racist joke? And the majority of people always raise their hand. The next question I always ask my class is, how many of you heard what you heard was a white supremacist joke as opposed to a black person saying something against a white? So now raise your hand if it's a white supremacist joke or white supremacist racial remark. Raise your hand for that. And the majority of the hands are generally still that. So you'll get a few, a black person making a racial remark against a white, et cetera, but the majority of every single class, and I've been doing this like now for about 10 years, and I've got those classes with 350 people in one class. Every single class, the majority is white racist comment. And so post means after, and after race, I don't think so.
Well, okay, let me.
So I think that there's the larger thing, which is post-identity, and post-feminism, post-race, post a whole bunch of other things actually fall. Yeah, post-black, all fall under post-identity. And so if we want to think back to what identity actually means and whether or not it still matters, that's probably a good thing to talk about, and not just the post-race part of it. One of the things I wanted to ask Maganthrie, and of course you can not agree to do this, but if you would tell all of us why you choose to call yourself black. That is a political act that you made, I'm sure a certain number of years ago, that you continue to use, and that has real efficacy for you.